Hi guys, this is Luetin and I'm back with another roundtable discussion, and I'm joined today by DCRU Colin, Matimio and Soggyflapjackes, and I am Luetin. So that's everyone. The first thing we're going to be talking about, we're talking about the patch, because obviously that's out today and it's a pretty big topic, so we're just going to really quickly go over it and just sort of bullet point it for everyone, and then we'll go into our own topics. So the patch has changed quite a few things, some major, some minor, and I think really what we want to know is kind of, do you think it's a good patch or a bad patch? For me personally, I think it is actually a good patch. I think they're working at balancing a few things. There's some gun changes, and I've seen people complaining already, going, why are you changing the guns, leave them, blah blah blah. But I think actually they have made an effort to not do too severe changes. They've made some small tweaks and things that, to be honest, were really necessary. There's also been some quite significant changes, and a couple of those we'll talk about. But to be honest, I kind of applaud DICE for actually having the balls to actually make some of these quite large changes, which, to be honest, could really sort of alienate some people, I think. So let's go to you, Colin, first. What do you think about the patch notes?
I think they're interesting. They're good. Like there are some things that are minor changes. Maybe when a little bit later on, we'll touch on them maybe changing too many things related to the same outcome at the same time. Like, when I talked to Alan Kurtz, Demise 99 previously, he would have talked about how they adjust certain things, and it's kind of like a pendulum. They'll take them too far one way, and then they kind of have to find a sweet spot back in the middle. We could see some things in this patch that they might have swung the pendulum too far. We'll see. I have to see how it plays out. But the main thing that I wanted to talk about was further balancing of the weapons, and in particular, everyone's beloved best gun in the game, M16, is taking a couple of nerfs. So they are adding more recoil to that gun, and I think that that's a good thing. DICE has a lot of data to work with, and they're probably seeing that an overwhelming number of people favor the M16, meaning that it's too good overall, and it needs to have a situational purpose and not be a master of everything. And I didn't really have a huge issue with it before, but now it's going to suffer at range because of that recoil, which good players will figure out how to work with pretty quickly, but it's not going to be quite as easy to just point and shoot.
I think, like I've said before, with the whole frag rounds thing and so on and so on, it's quite obvious when a gun needs a bit of a tweak, because, when so many people are using it, that actually starts affecting gameplay and so on and so on. This is really when it says, okay, look, if so many people are using it, this is something that maybe needs to have a little look at. So, yeah, I would agree with you there. Soggy, for you, good patch or bad patch?
Well, so far I think they've made some pretty good adjustments. I mean, obviously, as a patch goes on, you kind of find out what needs to be tweaked and what should stay the same. But so far it looks like they're heading in the right direction as far as recoil goes. And so yeah, I really like the tweaks they've made so far. I mean, obviously, I feel like I'm not really informed enough upon the patch thus far to see how it's going to impact the game long term.
Yeah.
But as far as the small tweaks go, as far as the belt-fed machine guns, the PDWs, and the recoil reductions, and kind of rebalancing of the assault rifles, I feel like in the long term this is going to make a lot more guns usable. Whereas the M16A3 usually was the gold standard, and now hopefully other guns can kind of play a role in the game. Hopefully not just, say, the F2000 and the AEK, but
yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Matimio, where are you with the new patch?
Well, I can't really call it a bad patch, because I just think this is more of just a couple of small tweaks that they're getting ready for the new Armored Kill DLC. I mean, really, they have the reload animation thing they're fixing. They're making some small changes to the assault rifles to put them, so they're just a little bit more balanced, and not everyone's using the M16A3. But there really wasn't a whole lot of sweeping changes like a lot of the previous patches. I think the only one would be the helicopter changes, which we'll talk about later. But I mean, so far it looks good, but we can't really tell until we actually get our hands on it.
Yeah. Nope, I totally agree with that. Okay, right, so we're going to our first topic for this evening, and I'm going to go with my topic, because it's my show, so I can do what I want. I'm going to go with my topic. No, So yeah, my topic for this evening is going to be about photorealism within games, and we move further and further forward with graphics all the time. And with other titles coming out now, Medal of Honor is going to be on par with the kind of graphics that we have now. But when we go into the next titles like Battlefield 4 and further on down the line, I mean, when you consider that the new consoles are going to be coming out probably in the next sort of year or perhaps, I don't know, 18 months, who knows. But when you think about the life of those consoles and you keep going forward in time with graphics improving, the way you integrate with your games improving and so on and so on. And the real question is, for me, and also this was posed by a few of my subscribers, what point should you say that this is too real? And, we've had things in the past, like think of Modern Warfare 2 with their little scandal where they had you cutting down innocent civilians, just mowing people down. Now, to be honest, that was such an unreal situation, and it was a very, very, for all the controversy that it had, it was a very kind of unreal thing. And, that people always complain about violence in computer games. Whenever a new Grand Theft Auto comes out, you're going to get the same people saying the same things and complaining about the game and blah, blah, blah. It's too violent and the kids, la, la, la. Okay, but I think that genuinely, when you think forward, okay, when graphics start getting to the point where maybe you can't tell the difference, is that real? How photorealistic it is? Think about games like RPGs and stuff where the graphics are so real and you go, wow, that really does look like a person. Do you want to be playing a game where it really looks like you're killing other people? And, just what kind of effect might that have on people? Should there be something in place where we just say, no, we don't want this? Or is it, up until now when people have complained about games being too violent, you always kind of brush them off and go, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know about games. But if they get to the point where they really are, looking so real and it maybe starts to make people feel a little bit uncomfortable, perhaps there's something in that. So I'm going to go to you, Colin. What do you think about that?
I think that people have misconstrued the impact that video games have on folks for a long time. I mean, anytime there's some act of violence, whether it's a public shooting or something like that, everyone's always looking for a root cause, and video games have been named as that root cause a number of times. I think that there were other factors that contributed to a particular individual deciding to pick up a weapon and attack innocent people. Whether they played Grand Theft Auto or Modern Warfare 2, that's not going to be the deciding factor. Now, when it comes to photorealism, I find that it adds to the immersive factor of the game, the immersive qualities. And the better a game looks, the more I feel like I'm in the environment. And, we're getting to a point where things look really, really good. The graphics are quite realistic. And as you said, next gen is going to be even more so. But I'm interested to see how far they can push it and, what it's going to lead to and what kind of doors that opens for game developers. Like, will we finally see nudity in video games that isn't completely hokey? And that's the other thing when it comes to realistic graphics. I don't know if it's North American culture or what, but they shy away from, it's very controversial to see breasts in a video game, but mowing people down with machine guns,
we'll kill thousands of people,
stabbing them. Yeah, exactly. But boobs are bad. Boobs are bad.
Yeah. It is a strange thing. I mean, they did do it in Heavy Rain. I don't know if you guys would have played that. Did you? Was Heavy Rain on the Xbox? I would have thought it was.
No, that was a PS3 exclusive.
Yeah, that was PS3 exclusive.
Yeah, there is a scene in that where she gets undressed in the shower and blah, blah, blah. But to be honest, I thought it was pretty good, actually, that scene. I mean, it was a bit like, they've put this in for the sake of it. But to be honest, actually, I often find with stuff like that, it's kind of like when I'm watching a movie or something, and it often sort of goes completely out of the sort of the mood of the film, and you go, what have they put this in for? It's totally unnecessary. But within the context of the game of Heavy Rain, it actually kind of suited the game and it suited the style. So in that context, I'm kind of like, this is actually fine. And so this is why when you come to war games and you go, okay, how is it going to make you feel? But you think of stuff like, okay, when you think of like Band of Brothers, and they did the Pacific one as well, which was relatively recent. But I watched that through, and I think unfortunately I got a bit hooked on it, and I watched 6 episodes back to back, and I went to bed and I was actually feeling kind of shell shocked. I was like, because I'd just been hearing bullets and explosions for 5 hours straight. So, but when it comes to games and stuff like this, okay, let me ask you, Matimio, do you think, if something's so real, would that make you feel uncomfortable playing the game?
Yeah, actually, from personal experience, I mean, I don't play first-person shooter, the single player, all that often, but I remember I played the Black Ops, not Black Ops 2, of course, but the original Black Ops, and there was a mission where you had to go up behind these, the enemy who were sleeping, and you just took their knife to their throat and you took them out, and it was really gory, and I remember playing in it, and I just was like, I don't want to kill this guy, I feel terrible, It was, the graphics aren't amazing, and I can only imagine when they get to the point where it's just they're actually real, like like you said, Heavy Rain developers, and they also have that Kara video. Mm-hmm. So when it gets to that point, I think people will get pretty uncomfortable, and you say that will people start to get more violent because graphics are getting to the point where it's photorealistic. It could be the opposite, where people are just completely turned off from the game because they don't want to feel like they're killing someone. Yeah,
that's actually kind of interesting. I was thinking about that as well. I was thinking that, when it gets to that point, it's kind of because, games to me are often very much like movies. They have a story and you get very involved in them to an extent. And, I think if it gets to that point where it's so real and something's happening, you do think of think if you watch some war films, often they have many points in it where they're shooting and stuff, and you're like, yeah, come on, you want them to win. But then there's often other moments where they have this kind of reflective period or something where they sort of have to rationalize what they're doing. And I think that's the kind of thing. To be honest, I actually don't think that's a bad thing at all, because I think that often, far too much, games kind of often trivialize the kind of the sort of acts they're representing. Now, I know a lot of people are going to jump on me, as always, when I start getting all serious, and they're just going to say, Luetin, you're taking it too serious, it's just a game, blah, blah, blah. But, I think you always have to sort of think a little bit about, the context that things are set in. And it's, funnily enough, right, it's one reason why I don't like the whole Nazi zombies thing in COD, because everybody loves this. But I found it just kind of a bit of a bizarre concept, and I was just like, And I don't know if you guys played through COD World at War, the campaign, but you did. When you get to the end, right, you get to the end of COD World at War, and it gets to the end of the game, and this little thing comes up, and it says, this game is dedicated to all the people in the Second World War. And I was just like, Are you kidding me? Yeah. Are you taking the piss? This quite badly written.
The ending of it was extremely climactic and almost out of a film. The glory of killing somebody with a machete, and then right at the end,
it was just absolutely tasteless. It really was, and I just thought, just in what world were they living when they thought that was an awesome idea to put that into the end of the game, honestly. And it just kind of, that for me sort of highlights it. It's just, it's a game, which is exactly what people say, all right, and you shouldn't try and relate the two things. However, I do think there is an opportunity where, within a certain context, you can start to kind of compare things and make a point. I think it all depends totally on the context in which you set your game. Soggy, have you got any thoughts about this topic?
I actually have some pretty strong opinions on this, because I may be a little younger than you guys, so I can definitely relate to having parents that are worried at times about this. And I think immersiveness has a place, but at the same time, I feel like if you cross that line, you're going to get some increased rates of psychopaths, because the thing about watching a war movie is you're watching it. And I've had my fair share of war movies. Letters of Iwo Jima, I'm not sure if you guys have seen that, comes to mind as a very graphic movie. But yes, yet a very compelling movie that I enjoyed a lot, except if I was in that game, if that movie became a game to me and I was in the situation of these soldiers, I feel like there's just a whole nother level of morality to it, where when you're watching a movie, you're watching it for the sake of watching it. But when you're playing a game, you're making decisions on behalf of that character. Yeah. And I feel like when games reach a graphical level to where it's real life, it may register to your brain at some point that you're trying to kill somebody. And when I'm playing a game, when I'm playing Battlefield 3 or Medal of Honor or Call of Duty, it does not register me that I'm killing somebody. As one of my friends have told me, you're just playing it for the points on the screen that flash on the screen. It's almost a drug effect, I guess. But it's certainly not, you don't have that nature of you want to kill somebody.
Something that you might find interesting was, I remember it was a year or two ago, I remember I saw this, and it was a program actually about this topic I saw on TV, and they'd done like some scientific studies, and what they did was they got people to they had a person who was like the test subject, and then another kind of person with this and what they were doing was they had a bowl of ice water. It was full of ice and it was freezing cold. And what they got the person to do was to take the test person's hand, put it into the ice water, and they had to hold it there for as long as they thought the other person could, withstand it. And obviously, if you hold your hand in ice water, it gets actually quite painful. It isn't just cold, your hand doesn't go numb, it actually hurts. Then what they did was, so they got them to just do this straight off, and they timed it. They didn't let them know how long they'd been doing it for, they just would hold it in there. Then what they did was they let them play sort of violent fighting computer games for a couple of hours, something like that. Then they brought them back and did the same test. The really interesting thing was that for people who had just gone away and watched, TV or something, when they came back, they did it for roughly about the same amount of time. For people who had been playing violent computer games and so on, it had kind of had an effect of slightly. They also, I should say, I think they let them calm down, so it wasn't like they just came straight out the game and their blood was all pumping. They just let them play the game for a while. They gave them a small break, brought them back, and the people who had been playing the games, basically it sort of desensitized them a little bit. And when they were holding these people's hands down, some of the people were actually wanting to take their hands out because they really, they lost that kind of sort of comprehension in a relatively short space of time. Now, all that is a very, very little simple test. And I think if you'd played a game or watched a film or whatever, I think it would always desensitize you a little bit. I don't think that by playing Battlefield or any other kind of violent game, most people are going to suddenly flip and go out there. Like Colin said, okay, it tends to be people who, when you hear about these things in the news, they've always got a lot of other issues going on. However, I do think it's interesting that it genuinely does have some effect on you as a person. And, I think it does basically kind of desensitize you, and it probably changes your feelings towards other people a little bit. So I think it's interesting when you think about going into the future, the way games are changing, what is going to be the limit? What is going to be the cutoff point? Right, I think we've talked about this enough now. So we're going to go forward. I'm going to go with Soggy's question now. So can you bring that one?
Well, my question wasn't really pertaining to the patch itself, as I was informed that it turns out it wasn't in the patch, but I just wanted to ask, what are your guys' thoughts on suppression in the game, and future games for that matter, because we have a lot of AAA games coming up that may be considering taking a few cues from Battlefield 3 for that matter. So I was just wondering if you guys think suppression has a place in first-person shooters, and whether or not their attempt at making realism kind of more... to blend it more seamlessly with a video game, which is obviously meant for a game.
Colin, what do you think about that? Do you think suppression is something that really needs to be in the game, or is it just, a frustration that affects the gameplay?
No, I think it's good, and I think that it is a good mechanic to have in the game. Like, you can't capture the whole essence of like fear of, if I stick my head up right now, that could be the end of me. You just can't capture that in a video game. Like, I can respawn. And so I think that it's a neat way to try and capture some of that, or at least, change your reactions so that, you can't be 100% laser beam accurate. You can't just stand up and return fire, because you wouldn't just stand up and return fire in a real situation. I think that they're going for authenticity. Now, people who play the game competitively, they have probably a valid gripe where, it's when you're trying to play the game at that level, it's not necessarily about, you don't want something in the game that affects your accuracy, whatever the case may be. And maybe it's an option that for the competitive scene you should be able to turn off. But, I like it. I think that when they first introduced it, it was weird. You didn't know what was going on, but it didn't really have a huge impact. Then they turned it way up and it was ridiculous. And now they kind of came back to a sweet spot. And I like it. I like the way that it plays out. And it adds tactics. It makes you think smarter. If you're taking fire, get some cover. Wait for things to settle down, and then you can assess the situation and go from there. So where it is now, I like it.
Yeah, and I think as well with like when you think about support classes and stuff, and I'm going to say as well, Level is always going on about how support classes don't have a place, but that's one thing that they're really, really good for is suppression. If you've got a big heavy LMG, you can lay down fire and it really does have a good suppressive effect. Matimio, what's your thoughts about suppression?
I like it for the same reasons that Colin just mentioned. I think it really just adds a different dynamic and layer to the game that most first-person shooters don't have. Like, Colin said, you can shoot in the general direction of someone, they have the suppression effect, and then they can't, come out, just guns blazing and take you out quickly. So I do like that, and it, like I said, it adds another layer. But then I also think that it needs some tweaking, because if you've ever played as the Recon, you've used a bolt-action rifle, you'll know that if you're suppressed, there's no way in hell that you're going to get that headshot, even if they're just a couple of feet away. Like, the bullet will just go in a completely random direction, and it's pretty frustrating. So I kind of I do like the suppression effect. I just wish they would kind of tweak it a little bit more. But I do think it's better where it is now compared to the first time and then the second patch.
Do you think that in principle, it's a good idea, but that perhaps we don't have the technicality to be able to actually properly implement it? Like, say, for perhaps, okay, if you're a long way away, it should have less of an effect, whereas if you're closer up, and you've got the whole sound of it and the weight of it and all this stuff, it should have more of an effect. Or perhaps there's just like, maybe different guns would have different effects and stuff. Maybe there's a lot more fine-tuning that, to be honest, is just too complicated to put into the game at this point.
And I just had a thought actually. And you know how the way it is now, you can aim at somebody, but your bullets don't go where you're aiming. I think that it would seem like you were getting ripped off less if they added some sort of randomization to your reticle, so that your reticle is jumping all over. You have to try and steady that. And if you manage to overcome that effect, rather than your bullets just randomly going where you're not where you're aiming. If they make it very, very difficult for you to aim, but if you through skill are able to overcome that, your bullets go where you're aiming. I think that would probably be a better way to implement the mechanic.
I agree, but I think you're also going to get those players out there that will just hate that, because then they feel like they are it's already in place right now where they feel like their skill is just completely taken out of it, or not completely taken out, but they just don't feel like they're in control. And if that was the case, sure, it sounded like if the system was in place, there would be some skill involved, but I still think people would complain that things are too unpredictable, and it's just I don't know.
I think it's an interesting one. I think the whole concept of it taking a choice away from you, and what they're trying to maybe do with the suppression system is they're trying to make it seem like your character is actually having a physical effect, like he's confused, he can't shoot back, blah blah blah. And I kind of, like I say, in principle I'm on board with that, but at the same time, funnily enough, it kind of ties back to what we were just talking about before this topic, which is the whole kind of how far do you take it? How real do you want it to be? And it's always going to be a really difficult kind of thin line to draw down, because some people say, well, Battlefield's not real at all. Some people call it a very realistic game. The thing is, I think when you have more realistic games, they can't, they're not always that fun, and it is a very difficult thing to balance up. I know when you've been playing things like Operation Flashpoint, great fun game, but I know at times I ended up sort of running 2 miles to get to the next position because they'd made the distances all so real, and it was just kind of like, Jesus, I'm just running across open ground for the last 30 minutes here, nothing's really going on, and I think games like Armour and stuff are very much like that as well. But Soggy, this was your topic. Have you got any sort of final thoughts on this one?
Well, yeah, I personally like it as well. I feel like it does add a level of immersiveness to it, and I just feel like they just need to tweak it a little more, maybe tone it down a little more, in my opinion. But I do think that they should also add a server feature where if you can turn it on or off, so that if you want to have some sort of competitive server, or if you just want to have, say, a hardcore mode and a suppression on, or you can have a normal mode and then suppression off, so you could have just more of a realism server and then kind of a non-hardcore based server. I feel like that would be good.
In fact, actually, I kind of think perhaps maybe it should have more of an effect in hardcore mode, because that seems to make sense. And the whole idea of having a core mode is that it's kind of more fast, more fun. It maybe has less of these kind of things. I think, with our own servers, I think that's a pretty good idea, the idea that you could turn it off. I think, unfortunately, if that happened, you might see that all servers had it turned off and stuff.
Probably.
But, it is an interesting one.
One last thing that I wanted to just get out there, since I'm among some pretty big YouTube names in this Skype chat, and maybe you could just get the word out there to DICE. I don't know. I am personally very frustrated with the sun in Battlefield 3. Just the sun blinds me a lot. I don't like it. It's a big tactical flashlight in the sky. And I just feel like that's another example of them just trying to get a ton of realism, because, you look right at the sun. But I don't know, maybe they could add some sort of sunglasses specialization or something for your squad spec. I don't know.
It's kind of interesting, actually. And I think that's quite a good idea, because it kind of ties in with the idea of control being taken out of you and other things having an effect on you. And I mean, I don't know, actually. I kind of like that idea that maybe you could have something like polarized lenses that allow. I mean, I know when I wear my sunglasses when I'm driving and stuff like this, it doesn't even need to be properly sunny. But my glasses really, help, because, they cut through that light and you can see much, much clearer. Actually, let's just very, very quickly talk about that. Colin, do you think that would be kind of a cool thing to have in the game?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Anything you put in as a mechanic that has such an impact on the game, like the sun, which we joked around about it being overpowered at one point. It's crazy how nutty the sun can be sometimes, but you need a counter. And if you want to put on squad welder's goggles as your spec, then I think that's a great option to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Matimio, would you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. I just find it funny that DICE likes to walk this line where they want to have their game realistic, but then they also will defend what they're doing in game for balance issues and reasons.
Yeah.
So it's just why do they pick certain things like the sun to be this, ridiculous overpowered thing in the sky, but not other things? So
it's true. It's a very bizarre combo and stuff. Okay. Right. We're going to go to Colin now, because I'm saving Matimio's question for last, because it's the best. So
I suppose.
Let's go to Colin's one now.
Well, no, I'm going to just come back to some of the stuff we talked about in the patch notes, and the overall balancing of the classes. Now, I think that people still would like to see other classes be a bit more useful, but I'm going to talk specifically about the assault class. And they have made changes to the M16. Are we going to see a new weapon emerge as the go-to weapon? I think we probably are. They have reduced the reload timers on the AEK, and from what I could see in the patch notes, made no other changes to that. So AEK is going to be, it's already a favorite among tryhards everywhere, and I think that it's going to see more airplay. And the M416, which I've actually been using a ton pre-patch, is getting a lot of love. So its short reload time is being reduced, which means if you still have one in the chamber, that's your short reload time. And it's receiving a recoil reduction, the initial recoil and overall recoil. So is that going to be the new go-to gun? I think that one of them is going to emerge as the one that everyone's using. Just don't know which one. I don't think that it's really possible to, unless you make all the guns carbon copies of one another with a different skin, to create a situation where there isn't a weapon that people gravitate towards. I think that they've done a good job, and no one weapon is overwhelmingly better than everything else in that class, but even one that's slightly better is still going to, that's going to draw the attention of most players, because they want that edge, they want the advantage, and it's all about that precious KD.
Okay.
What do you think?
Well, let me just very quickly say, for one thing as well, I think it's interesting. Perhaps this is an issue you have when you have too many guns. When you look at other games, and I know I was playing some original Bad Company this week, your weapon choices are limited. And, when you have that, you have bigger differences between the guns, bigger pluses and minuses. But, Matimio, let me go to you. What's the next tryhard gun?
I honestly think it's going to be the M416 and the AAK, just exactly what Colin said. What was the biggest surprise for me was, if I remember right, the M16A3 and the M416, they basically have identical stats, except for I think the M4 has slightly less initial recoil, and it also has less, It has lower RPM, and that's really the only difference. And so the fact that they're
slightly longer reload.
Right.
Yeah.
So there really wasn't any reason to use it. Personally, I love the weapon. It's fantastic, but it doesn't, it's just not as good as the M16. But what I was surprised about is that they're nerfing the M16, but then they buff the M4. So it's just kind of like, why are they just do one, and then just kind of see how things go. Well, this goes into the whole, more patches more frequently would probably be a better thing. But I think they're going to push it a little bit too far, and the M416 is going to start to be the go-to assault rifle.
Yeah, let me just really quickly touch on that. And it's funny, it's a bit of a shame that Levelcap's not here today, because I know he's quite an advocate of the M416. And but I know from speaking to him and what he said about the M416 was that he said it really only required a small change to bring it up in line with those other guns. And it sounds to me from the patch notes, and actually let me just really quickly grab the patch notes right here. For the M416, basically what you've got is they've reduced the vertical, horizontal and first shot recoil, and this is they say that it's to make it clearly different from the M16A3. Well, it's definitely going to make it clearly different now, because it's just going to sort of change both of them so drastically. It's also going to have a small reload change as well, like we've said, but I really think that they've gone overboard with it. I don't think it needs all those changes to the recoil. I mean, the gun already handled fairly well, but we say this, we haven't actually played it yet. We don't know.
I was just going to say, we haven't had our hands on it yet.
It could be very, very minor changes. I mean, they already said with the reload times that it's almost more of a cosmetic thing than anything else. So perhaps it's going to have very little impact. Perhaps all these recoil changes, you'll pick up the gun and it'll be the same. You don't know. Soggy, what's your thoughts about kind of assault classes and the way weapons kind of stack up against each other?
Well, personally right now as the game is, I would really like to see the support class, actually all other classes except for the assault, kind of get buffs, because I feel like they're really outgunned at almost every range, minus, I don't know, maybe long range with a sniper rifle. But I saw them trying to buff the belt-fed machine guns, giving them a bit more accuracy. I'm reading it right here, standing and firing while aiming. I mean, personally, I really like that, because as it is right now, an AEK will outgun most engineer kit weapons and most support kit weapons. So it's really, I feel like you need to even the playing fields and kind of tweak it more so that each kit is doing its role. That's kind of actually personally why I was opposed that they gave the med pack to the assault kit, because I feel like it almost unbalances it a little, and I really liked the Bad Company 2 days with the medic and the light machine gun. That's a personal opinion of mine, but...
No, I think that if you go back to Bad Company 2, those two classes had a lot more utility together. Unless there's vehicles you have to deal with, I feel that, if you have squad ammo on, there's not a whole lot that the assault kit can't get done as infantry by themselves. And I think it's too powerful.
Mm-hmm. I think that, we have mentioned this on other videos before about classes and how they balance up against one another. And again, like I say, there's multiple producers when I do videos like this who have said about different classes and how they're not very good. Remember, people always used to say that the engineer class was overpowered because it had so much weaponry at its disposal and most of the rifles were fairly good, etc. To be honest, I really think that, it's a bit of a mentality with other FPS games that aren't Battlefield, that the classes should kind of stack up against one another really fairly. But with Battlefield, it's much more about playing a role. And, like we've said before, if you've got a support class, the way I often play that support class is to kind of sit behind my guys and lay down suppressing fire. I hamper the guys coming forward so that my assault guys in front have a much easier time dealing with them. Or, I'm laying down so much fire that I cause a big sound, a big distraction, and it makes people look at me when they should be looking at the other guys that are coming for them. That's one thing. Snipers as well. Snipers often find it very hard to sort of find a place in a match because they can't maybe get the kill amounts that the guys at the front can running around shooting. But if you have 2 or 3 guys as a sniper unit, okay, think about, for example, Carg Island, the second base up on that hill there. If you have 2 or 3 snipers, not only are they quite a distraction because people are constantly looking at them going, oh, they're up there. Now, I have to say as well, just to balance that argument, okay, I sometimes find it annoying if I'm attacking and there's a load of people sniping because they aren't getting many kills, etc. But if they're actually half decent guys who are shooting, all right, it doesn't matter if they get a kill. If they start getting a lot of hit markers, a lot of suppression markers and stuff like this, it will actually start affecting the guys on the ground. And I've been at the receiving end of that many, many times, where you've had multiple fire coming in from us. And it's just irritating, because if you don't look at those guys and you don't deal with them, they become more of an issue, and you suddenly find your attention is split. So this is why I say, roles with classes is not always about maximizing kills and how you stack up against other weapons. It's much more, in my opinion, to do with how you perform in the battlefield and whatever specific role you're doing tactically. Matimio, do you have any thoughts about that?
I do agree with you. The roles are important and everything, but I just still feel like
you can disagree.
Class,
you can disagree strongly. It's all right.
I don't disagree strongly. I just feel like the assault class right now just does too much. Back to the whole class thing. I like the bad company system, because if you played the assault, sure, you would get the ammo packs and you could just abuse your grenade launcher, but you weren't a one-man army and you couldn't just sustain yourself, and you didn't have the best. I mean, you had the best rifles in the game. They were just like amazing, but you couldn't just heal yourself up. You had to be a team player, and you had to have a medic with you to be successful. Yeah. And in this game, people are just running around like Rambo with their med packs, and I just feel like that class in general just does too much. I mean, sure, it can't take out tanks or anything like that, but it just feels a lot more effective than all the other classes.
I think one thing that we would change, and Level's spoken about this as well, I'm always dropping his name, but we talked about this in another video, and we talked about the paddles and how the paddles are so irritating, the way you can just res train people. I'm a very, very strong, I wish they would make this change. I really want the paddles to have some kind of charge system. Either way, you need to put something into it, or it only gets 3 charges and that's it. It needs to. I think the medic paddle should have like 3 charges. That's enough for your squad. Once the charges are out, you have to reload the gun from ammo, or perhaps even it's just dead completely. I don't know. But I really feel like that would have a very interesting change to the game. I don't think it would break it. I just think it would make people think more carefully about who they're reviving. You wouldn't get into these bloody situations. Let me give you an example. I was playing close quarters, not always the best map to get rezzed on anyway, but I was playing close quarters, and there was a guy in a doorway, and he was like 2-3 doorways away, looking through this very, very tiny gap. Okay, now my guys couldn't see where he was because he was looking through this thin line, but they kept rezzing me, thinking, because they couldn't see him, and they kept rezzing me, I would instantly get killed. I got rezzed 5 times in a row, and I got killed 5 times in a row. And I was just going, for the love of God, someone let me die so that I can revive elsewhere. It was just like, I couldn't play.
I think there was a Battlefield Friends episode on that, if you guys have seen that.
Yeah, no, I have
cartoon.
Seen that. Yeah,
it's
exactly.
hilarious.
It was, yeah, I hadn't actually thought about relating it to that, but yeah, it was actually exactly like that. And
like
I'm sure.
Like the noob, and he's constantly paddling the guy.
Oh, God,
and he's like, well, have you killed the guy?
It was terrible. It was terrible. It was really terrible. It was so funny.
Or maybe they put a limit on the number of times you can be rezzed.
Yes, that would be another interesting one.
Between spawns.
I mean, the whole issue of reviving also kind of ties in with that class thing. And, reviving for me, I get all the time on my videos, right? Because I'm not a kind of crazy reviver where whenever I see a little squiggle on my map, I go straight for it, okay? And even when there's people next to me, I don't always revive them, because sometimes, all right, you actually have other things going on, or things that are more important that's going to get in your way or whatever. You need to sort of prioritize what is going on in the game. And I always get this where, like, Luetin, you didn't res that guy at 3 minutes 20. For the Christ's sake, I'm not going to res every single person on the map every time I see him. I'm not a points whore. I've got other things I'm trying to do. If I'm running somewhere already, okay, I don't want to have to stop, turn around, and revive that one guy, okay? I'm already somewhere else. If I'd stopped to do that, I could have been halfway to my next point already. And to me, okay, time in a game is more important than resing one person. If you're in a situation where you really require it, or it's safe to do so, yeah, go for it. But you don't need to res every single person. Okay, let's go on now to our final topic. We got a bit of time on this one, so it's all good. Matimio, your topic, bring it in.
So in the patch, they announced that the helicopter gunner is no longer going to have the flares, and pretty much everyone realizes that this is going to be a huge game changer. They said in the patch notes the reason why they did this was because if a chopper duo could basically stay in the sky the entire match and rain death upon everyone, and no one could take them out, which in my opinion is completely false, but that's, we'll talk about that. They also changed the Stinger missile range, so it's easier to lock on, and also the altitude for you to lock on as well, so they can't just go below radar. And now it looks like you will be able to lock on, but they're also changing the way or how much damage the gunners and the pilot do against tanks and I believe jets as well. So there's like a lot of changes going on right now for the air and even ground as well. So I just kind of wanted to get your guys' opinion on what do you think this is going to change, well, mostly for the armored kill since it's coming out so soon, and how this is going to change the air dynamic.
Soggy, let me go to you first. What's your thoughts about it?
Personally, I just think that the problem arises when you have a game that has so many different dynamics with it, with vehicles and weapons and whatnot. A huge problem arises especially when you don't have a very consistent patch cycle as far as you have to wait for each expansion pack, is when you tweak so many variables at once. What happens is you kind of mess things up along the way. You may fix some things, but you may drastically change others. And I mean, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? You get a game that's very realistic, has a ton going on, but then you also have things that are changing. Personally, I think, I don't fly much, so I'm one of these guys that gets frustrated by helicopters, by, owning the skies, by Matimio and everybody else just destroying me. And I just think that, I don't think it's actually a good move that they removed the flares for the gunner, because I feel like that was a really important role that the gunner could have as far as defending the helicopter goes. And I actually really did enjoy the series that Matimio would do where he would squad up with somebody else and fly in the helicopter, because it showed that Battlefield can be a game where if you communicate, you succeed. And ultimately, you want to reward that. You want to reward communication. And I like that they are making the Stingers and the anti-air more effective, but I feel like they shouldn't have taken away the flares for the gunner.
Okay, let me just read the small changes for the damage and stuff for the helicopters. It says increase the damage helicopter and jet rockets do to helicopters, jets and infantry. Increase the damage helicopter gunners and IFVs do to helicopters and jets, and fixed jets not getting a top attack damage bonus on laser designated targets. So they made some changes to the damages there on aircraft. I'm going to say my thoughts on this in a sec, but Colin, do you think that it's a good thing or a bad thing overall to remove this from the helicopter?
Well, I think it's another one of those things where they've changed two sort of opposing forces too much at the same time. Like at one point they changed the damage that those jets or helicopters did against tanks in the same patch that they nerfed the repair tool.
Yeah.
So, that's one of those changes where I'd like to see them do one or the other in buffing the anti-air missiles against the choppers before they go and take away the flares for the gunner, or take away the flares for the gunner and let the chips fall where they may. One or the other, but both at the same time might turn the helicopters into, flying tin can death machines, much like the tanks were about 2 patches ago.
Yep. For me, I'm going to say I personally have no problem with it. I don't have a problem with it because when I've played other versions of Bad Company and Battlefield and stuff like this, they didn't have all these multiple countermeasures. And not only that, but when you think about other aircraft, when you think about the Little Bird and you think about the Venom, they don't have multiple countermeasures and they can stay up perfectly adequately. And, my tactic when I used to play in the helicopter on Bad Company 2 and 1, you take some damage, you fly away low, you skim low so they can't get rockets back on you or whatever, and not to forget you've got below radar. Okay, so when you can pop down, that has a really strong effect on those kind of missiles. You can fly away, get out of line of sight, drop down, quick repair, you're back in the game. So it makes a big change. But I know that now Igla damage has gone up significantly, so things like that it doesn't allow you perhaps to do that anymore. But the other thing is, when you think about the firepower that the helicopter has compared to other things, it's got the missile pods and, it's got the laser designated targets, you've got the gunner. It can be an amazingly powerful, combo. That chain gun from the gunner position does unbelievable damage to people on the ground. It really does. It will destroy anything that it goes near. And I think you have to balance the power of that that vehicle against what people can do on the ground. I have been in games where people, you have a good team using the ECM and the flares, and people are locking them up, they're firing missiles, they've got a SOFLAM up, and you can't take it down because of the way they're flying. Now, I know that the counter argument to that is, okay, if they're flying really well, if they're being really skilled with the helicopter, then why shouldn't they stay up in the air? I do agree with that, but sometimes it's just so over the top. Literally, it's like you can do nothing to them. I don't believe that anything in the game should be so strong that you can't do anything to it, even if the people are playing really well, because there must be something in there that will allow you to kind of get some angle on those things. I really don't think that it'll break helicopters. I think they'll be totally usable. It just means that perhaps, okay, you're going to have a little bit more risk of going down. But what have you got about this, Matimio? Because I know you have got your opinion on this.
So Level and I do the get to the top chopper, or we used to. We kind of stopped with because of the whole trolling stuff. But the comparison between Bad Company, it kind of works. But the same thing is that they didn't have in Bad Company. You didn't have like all these lock-ons, and there wasn't jets in the sky.
You did have I was going to say you did have tracer darts though, which basically as soon as you
you had to fire those though.
Right.
It was much more difficult.
It took skill to trace, and or if somebody was using countermeasures, you had the AT4, which also took skill. Like so, there were skill-based ways to take down choppers in Bad Company 2.
Yeah.
That
I think people have mentioned bringing back the AT4. I would totally agree with that. To be honest,
love that.
Yeah, I think it would be a good thing to come back. And to be honest, right, it would be a good balance to taking down helicopters and stuff like that. But the lock-on things, it definitely is tricky. The other thing is, as I have said a million bloody times, I wish they would sort out the ECM. If they sorted out the ECM, I think this would solve a lot of the issues. The issue now is that a helicopter with ECM is basically invulnerable, whereas with the jets it seems to be all over the place. So it's just it works or doesn't or whatever. Sometimes it doesn't even, the graphic doesn't even demonstrate properly still. So it's a really weird one, and that is that I don't understand what it is that causes so many issues with it. They should just literally decide, fix it, and say that's how it works. In my opinion, though, I don't think that the ECM should probably distract the missiles. If they didn't do that, then it would make helicopters a bit more vulnerable and so on and so on. And then you could keep the flares for the gunners. And there is a very long reload time for gunner flares. Let's not forget that as well.
Oh, I was just going to quickly add that kind of a quick tangent off of the helicopters is, what do you guys think about the AC-130? And there's 2 seats in that, and as far as both of them having flares or not having flares or how that should work. Do you guys think it's going to change the battlefield a ton? Or
I don't think they can deploy. Can they? Can they deploy flares? I don't think they can be locked on from the ground, from what I've seen from it. Anyway,
they have flares. Yeah.
They definitely.
They've shown pictures of it. Yeah.
Okay, I think it'll be interesting to see how that one turns out. But again, we need to wait till tomorrow really to sort of see any footage of that. So you can check my channel if you want to see the footage.
Plug it.
Shameless.
It's shameless.
Shameless.
I don't care. I've got a PS3, so you can all suck it up. But
I have one too. I just haven't bought premium.
I have an Xbox. I just don't use the thing.
But no, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But Matimio, go on. Let's hear more from what you think about it. But also, how do you think as well? I'll tell you something else as well. I think it's interesting that they've removed the flares, but I think it's stupid that they have changed the ground-based anti-aircraft weapons, because they have buffed those. I don't see the point. Because I use those all the time, and I think they've got perfect range. I think the change that they made recently was the best one, because the change that they made previously, where it reduced the range of those weapons, I think it really was necessary, even though I'm a person that uses those and so on. I remember though, when you're in a helicopter, you could be like a bloody mile away and you're still getting locked on from those iglas. If they've changed it back to the degree where it does that's a stupid change.
I don't think they're going to go that far, but back to the whole, why I still want to see flares in the game. So when you're in the sky in Battlefield 3, there are just a ridiculous amount of things that can lock onto you or even fire at you. And, there's jets, there's infantry with their Stinger missiles, there's anti-air, there's tanks. There's just a lot of stuff that can fire at you. As, compared to Bad Company, there were a couple things. And as we said, most of those required some sort of skill. So there's a lot of times where in our series, we just felt completely useless because there would be a couple of teams out there who were just using the SOFLAMs to lock onto us, and then a javelin team would take us out. And there was literally nothing we can do in those situations. And it's infuriating because we honestly feel like the chopper is useless at that point. And then there's some rounds where we just completely dominate the ground because no one's really paying attention to us. So I feel like it really depends on the people in the match to be proactive and use the tools at their disposal, because if they're using them, the chopper becomes a lot less effective. And I mean, I have personal experience with it pretty much every week. So I do feel like it went a little bit too, even though that the flares right now, they only work like half the time. So I guess it's not going to be a huge change, but I still would like to have them in the game.
I think it's kind of interesting as well. That, like you say, it's all about the team on the ground. It's definitely true. I also think it's really important to remember that you have the difference between PC play and console play, and I think it's important to remember that when you're playing with the PC, there's probably a lot more people on the ground, which means that there's going to be people, there's going to be more people who can dedicate time to just solely focusing on things like that, which means that you're going to have a lot more eyes on you. There's going to be a lot more people ready to take you out.
And they will.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, on the other hand, if you do have a good team, then that can make the difference as well. And I will say, even though console has less numbers of people, when I play with some of my guys, for example, if we know a helicopter is causing a big issue, like on Karg Island or Caspian border, we will, we'll be aware of that and be ready to take it out. Which is why in some of my videos, when we're at the first base defending on Karg and the helicopter's coming in, you'll see me setting up a SOFLAM, and then you see my guys ready to take it out, and the helicopter has 3 javelins simultaneously going towards it, which is always quite hilarious. You're like, yeah, that heli's going down. So, Colin, what were you going to say?
Oh, no, I was going to joke around a little bit saying, yes, there are more people on PC, but to be fair, most of those guys are sniping on a cliff, complaining about the chopper.
So true. So true.
Okay, so Matimio, have you got anything else to say about the whole helicopter issue and in general those kind of changes that are getting made?
Yeah, well, even though I have all the complaints with, I think they're going a little bit too far with the flares and increasing some of the anti-air, I do like the change that the gunner is going to be able to do more damage against jets, because right now, if a jet does a strafe run on a helicopter, like the gunner, even if they put their entire magazine or whatever you want to call it into the jet is fine. They're not even disabled, and they can go for another run, or they really don't really have any problems there. But now, hopefully, it'll be to the point where we can finally disable them, and they have to be a little bit more cautious if they go after a helicopter, and they're not just this big boat in the sky or tub in the sky that's just going to get taken out right away.
Yeah, I do think that's a good change as well, because I mean, you can imagine that if the helicopter pilot could get a heat seeker on, if that could happen, but if they did, then and the gunner can get a few rounds in there as well, then bye jet. So I think that would make a good difference. And also, often depending on how good the jet pilot is, they may not be going full speed or something when they come in. Let me just really quickly, before we finish up, talk about one other thing, and this was something that I've spoken about, and it was Level's idea. The whole idea about G-force for jets, and I want to talk about this now because I think it's really interesting, and I'd like to hear your opinions on it. But basically, me and Level were talking in one of our videos about the jet issue and the fact that people continually circle and circle and circle. And, we were saying, well, what could we do that would actually have some kind of change to that? Level came up with the idea of G-force, that when you get to a certain G, because you're constantly banking all the time, when you get to a certain point, your character will start to black out. Imagine it as a very heavy form of suppression. And that would effectively mean that you had to break your turn, otherwise your character would black out and your jet would just go down and probably crash. I think it's cool. It's an awesome concept. It's really good. Colin, have you got thoughts about that? Would you like to see that in game? Do you think it's a stupid issue with the whole fact that people are circling? I'll tell you one other thing that I think is really irritating. It annoys the hell out of me that the jets effectively can't stall. I get it bizarre. You can slow down to the speed of some ground vehicle in your jet and it won't stall. It's absolutely stupid. I think they really do, have jets in the game, but make them work with some kind of dynamic. I mean, unless you're flying vertically up, the jet will not stall, which to me seems absolutely stupid. Colin, jets, what do you think about them?
Well, I mean, I'm not a huge jet pilot, but I think it's tough to integrate something like jets into a game like this where, the playing field just isn't really big enough to support jets. Like, in order to stay in some sort of effective combat range. So I feel like they're kind of there more as a novel thing, and they're pretty unrealistic. They put them in there for people to have fun with. I don't think that they're overly authentic, and I think that they could make some changes to like what Level Cap suggested with the G-Force, or have them stall more. But again, like, DICE does go for authenticity, but they still try and balance out the fun factor. And I think that jets really are something thrown in there for the fun factor, even though you can't really make them realistic or authentic or to the scale of the playing field. So, I don't have a huge issue with it, but, I think that some of these ideas like G-Force, they brought them back into this game, and maybe there will be further enhancements in like Battlefield 4, for example, that'll make them a little bit more believable, I guess.
Okay, Soggy, have you got any thoughts about jet aircraft?
Well, yeah, I was. I'm not sure if you guys know, but I live in the Chicagoland area, so we just had the Air and Water Show, and I went downtown. We saw the Blue Angels. It's really awesome. Those guys are incredible pilots. But I like the idea you have with the blackouts with jets, and I think Colin does bring up a really good point that it is a lot for fun. One thing they could also consider doing with as far as blackouts goes, this may not be something they could really add into Battlefield 3. They could consider it for Battlefield 4 is maybe putting in some sort of pressure suit where the pilots do have a pressure suit on. And potentially you could have some sort of monitor that monitors how much G-force you're taking and how much maybe your pressure suit has some sort of stamina to it or something, so that you could if you do too many turns too quickly, it depletes the blood or oxygen going to your head. This may be way too realistic, and you could pass out. And maybe if you could get an unlock as a better pressure suit, do more turns, but at the expense of not having rockets or something. I don't know.
I don't think that's out of the realms of possibility at all. I think that it wouldn't take a lot to put that in place. I mean, all you're literally talking about is how hard the jet is turning, and depending on its speed, and we know as well how people get those hard turns. It's a mechanic. Like, if you were alternating your air brake and your acceleration very, very fast, that would kind of generally instigate the fact that you're turning very hard. I'm sure it wouldn't be too hard for them to work out those mechanics. Matimio, last thoughts on this?
Well, I really do like the whole blackout thing. I think that's very interesting, but I think something that would really help is if they added 3D clouds into the game.
Yeah.
That you could use as cover, and you could, if you had a jet behind you, you could literally go into the clouds, and then once you reach the other side, bank to a different direction, and the enemy jet would have no idea where you went really until they got through. I think that would really solve a lot of the problems of this, circling just round and round. And sure, it would still happen, but if someone could get to the clouds, they could, juke out their enemy and get behind them potentially, or just break that cycle.
Yeah, I think it's very true. Okay, guys, well, I want to thank everyone for coming along this evening. Had a really good discussion, I think. It's going to be an interesting week coming up, guys. We've got the patch coming, and we also have Armored Kill coming. So I think as we go forward, there's plenty of changes that are coming with Battlefield. We still have many more DLCs to come, so I think it's not going to be the last big patch we see for quite a while. Interesting to see whether any of these things have any kind of game-breaking technology. What is going to be the next try-hard gun? Do you guys have any opinion on that? So I want to thank DCRU Colin for coming along. I want to thank Matimio, and I want to thank Soggyflapjackes. I'll see you guys very soon for another roundtable discussion.